The rope bit into Eleanor Pike's wrists as another bid echoed through the dusty Montana air. $2,000 for a human life. She stood on that crude wooden platform, tears carving paths through the dirt on her cheeks, surrounded by men who saw her as property, not a person. 3 weeks ago, she'd had a future. Now she had only terror. The drunken miner to her left reeked of whiskey and violence. The cold-eyed rancher on her right smiled like a predator. Then a voice cut through the chaos, calm and certain. $3,000. Eleanor's heart stopped. Everything was about to change. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eleanor's journey reaches across this world. The sun beat down mercilessly on Silver Bend, Montana territory, turning the main street into a ribbon of dust and desperation. Eleanor Pike had learned in 3 terrible weeks that hell wasn't always fire and brimstone. Sometimes it was the jeering laughter of men who'd forgotten what it meant to be human, the rough wood of an auction block beneath bare feet, and the metallic taste of fear that no amount of swallowing could wash away. She'd stopped counting the faces in the crowd. 40, maybe 50 men pressed close to the makeshift platform that some enterprising devil had constructed in front of the Lucky Strike saloon. Miners still black with coal dust from the morning shift. Drifters whose eyes held the kind of emptiness that came from seeing too much and feeling too little. Ranch hands spending wages they hadn't earned yet, all of them looking at her like she was a horse to be broken, a tool to be used, a thing to be owned. The auctioneer, a rail-thin man named Silas Cobb, who smiled with too many gold teeth, raised his voice above the murmur of the crowd. Now, gentlemen, you can see this one's quality goods. Young, strong, knows her letters and numbers according to the manifest. Starting bid is $500. Eleanor's hands trembled where they were bound in front of her, thick rope abrading skin already raw from days of similar restraints. She wanted to scream that she wasn't goods, wasn't property, wasn't anything that could be bought and sold. But the gag they'd tied across her mouth reduced her protests to muffled sounds that only seemed to excite certain members of the crowd. 3 weeks. It had only been 3 weeks since her world had shattered. She closed her eyes and tried to find some other place in her mind, somewhere the Montana sun didn't beat down on her exposed shoulders, somewhere the stench of unwashed bodies and cheap alcohol didn't choke her. She tried to remember Boston, the boarding house where she'd lived with her Uncle Theodore, the small room with lace curtains and books stacked on every available surface. Uncle Theo, with his wire-rimmed spectacles and gentle hands, who'd taught her literature and mathematics, who'd promised her a new life in the West, where his brother owned a mercantile in Oregon. 600, someone shouted, and Eleanor's eyes snapped open. The voice belonged to a man she'd seen before, a miner with a scar running from temple to jaw and hands like sledgehammers. He grinned at her, revealing gaps where teeth should have been, and made a gesture that turned her stomach. 650. This from a younger man, barely out of his teens, with the desperate look of someone trying to prove something. 700. The numbers climbed, and with each new bid, Eleanor felt another piece of herself crumbling. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Women weren't sold like cattle in America, not even in the territories. There were laws, weren't there? Marshals and judges But Silver Bend had no marshal. Silver Bend had no law except what men with guns decided it would be. She'd learned that when the bandits had attacked their wagon 2 days out from Bannock. She'd learned it when they'd shot Uncle Theodore in the chest and thrown his body into a ravine like it was trash. She'd learned it when they'd dragged her, screaming, to a camp where a man named Virgil Crane ran a business trading in human misery. $1,000. The voice was harsh, slurred with drink, and Eleanor's gaze found its source. A massive brute of a man with a barrel chest and eyes that swam with whiskey courage. Bull Garrison, she'd heard someone call him. He owned a played-out mine 15 miles north and a reputation for cruelty that extended even further. Well now, Silas Cobb's gold teeth flashed in the sunlight. Bull Garrison entering the bidding. Do I hear 1,100? 1,200. The new voice was cold, controlled, utterly devoid of emotion. Eleanor turned her head and found herself looking at a man who sat astride a black horse at the edge of the crowd. He was perhaps 40, dressed in expensive clothes that spoke of money and power. His face was all sharp angles and calculating eyes, the face of a man who always got what he wanted and didn't care how he got it. "Marcus Hendry joins us," Silas practically crowed. 1,200 from the owner of the largest spread in 3 counties. 13! Bull Garrison swayed on his feet, one meaty hand gripping the edge of the platform to steady himself. "I ain't letting some fancy-pants rancher take what's mine." 1,500. Marcus Hendry's tone didn't change, as if he were discussing the price of fence posts rather than a human being. The crowd pressed closer, energized by the competition. Eleanor could smell their sweat, their excitement, their hunger. She pulled against the ropes binding her wrists until blood began to seep around the rough hemp. Better to hurt herself than to let them see her break completely. 1,500 from Mr. Hendry. Silas Cobb's eyes gleamed with avarice. He was probably getting a percentage. "Do I hear 16? 2,000! Bull Garrison's roar rattled windows in the saloon behind them. $2,000, and any man who bids against me can settle it with fists or guns." A murmur rippled through the crowd. $2,000 was more than most men in Silver Bend saw in 2 years of hard labor. Bull Garrison was serious, and everyone knew he was dangerous enough to back up his threats. Eleanor felt hope dying in her chest. Of the 2 men bidding, she didn't know which would be worse. Bull Garrison would use her until she broke, then probably kill her when he got bored. Marcus Hendry would be colder, more calculating. She'd be a possession to him, like his cattle and his land, valuable only as long as she served a purpose. $2,000! Silas's voice cracked with excitement. "Going once!" Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. She thought of her mother, dead these 10 years, and wondered if there was any mercy in whatever came after this life. She thought of Uncle Theodore, who'd promised her safety and adventure, whose blood had soaked into Montana soil while bandits laughed. "Going twice!" She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. God felt very far away from Silver Bend. "Soul, $3,000. The voice cut through Silas Cobb's final call, like a blade through silk, quiet, calm, and utterly certain. The crowd's noise died instantly, every head turning to find the speaker. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. At the back of the crowd, a man sat astride a dusty roan horse. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe just under 6 feet, with the lean, weathered build of someone who'd spent his life working hard under an unforgiving sun. He wore simple clothes, canvas pants, a worn cotton shirt, a leather vest that had seen better days, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded eyes the color of a summer storm. His face was all hard planes and quiet strength, the kind of face that didn't give much away but suggested depths worth exploring. He didn't look wealthy, he didn't look powerful, but something in the way he sat that horse, in the way those gray eyes swept across the crowd, spoke of a man who didn't make promises he couldn't keep. $3,000, he repeated, his voice carrying easily now that the crowd had fallen silent. Cash. Here and now. Bull Garrison spun around, his face purpling with rage. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Ryder Hale." The cowboy's expression didn't change. "And I'm ending this auction." "Like hell you are." Bull took a step toward him, fists clenching. "You can't just—" "Can't I?" Ryder's hand moved, casual as could be, to rest on the butt of the revolver at his hip. He didn't draw it, didn't threaten, just let his hand settle there like it belonged. "I made a bid, legal and binding. You want to go higher?" Bull Garrison's alcohol-fogged brain tried to work through the mathematics. $3,000. He didn't have it. Hell, he probably didn't have 300. "Mr. Hendry." Silas Cobb's voice had lost some of its enthusiasm. He could sense the shift in the crowd's mood, the sudden tension that came when men started thinking about guns instead of money. Marcus Hendry studied Ryder Hale for a long moment, his calculating eyes missing nothing. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "I know when a pot's not worth the ante." He turned his black horse and rode away without another word, and Eleanor understood what he'd seen. Something in Ryder Hale that suggested bidding against him would cost more than money. "Well then," Silas tried to recapture the moment's energy and failed. $3,000. Going once, going twice. Wait just a damn minute. Bull Garrison lurched forward, pointing a shaking finger at Ryder. I know you! You're that drifter from the Box H ranch. Ain't nothing but a hired hand. Where'd you get $3,000? Ryder reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily with coin. He tossed it to Silas Cobb, who caught it with greedy hands and quickly counted the contents. His eyes widened. It's all here, Silas breathed. 3,000, exactly. Then we're done. Ryder dismounted in one fluid motion and walked toward the platform, the crowd parting before him like water before a ship's bow. Eleanor watched him come closer, her heart hammering so hard she thought her ribs might break. Was this better? Worse? This man had just spent a fortune on her. What did he expect in return? Ryder stepped up onto the platform, moving past Silas Cobb like the auctioneer didn't exist. Up close, Eleanor could see the lines around his eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the silver just beginning to thread through dark hair at his temples. He was probably in his mid-30s, old enough to have lived, young enough to still be dangerous. His hands went to the knot holding the gag in place. Eleanor flinched instinctively, and his hands stilled. I'm just going to take this off, he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. That all right with you? Eleanor nodded, too shocked by the question to do anything else. No one had asked her permission for anything in 3 weeks. His fingers worked the knot with surprising gentleness, and the gag fell away. Eleanor gasped in a full breath of air, her jaw aching from being forced open for so long. Better? Ryder asked. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, too raw. She nodded again instead. He pulled a knife from his belt, a wicked-looking blade that made several people in the crowd step back, and Eleanor's fear spiked. But he just turned it to the ropes binding her wrists and cut through them with 2 quick strokes. You're free now, he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Eleanor stared at her hands, at the raw wounds where the rope had bitten deep, at the blood that had dried in dark lines across her palms. Free? She didn't understand the word anymore. The hell she is! Bull Garrison had found his courage again, probably in the bottom of a whiskey bottle. You bought her fair and square, which makes her your property, which means... Ryder turned, and whatever Bull Garrison saw in his face made the larger man go silent mid-sentence. She's not property, Ryder said, each word dropping into the sudden quiet like a stone into still water. She's not goods, she's not livestock, she's a person who's been hurt and scared and treated like she doesn't matter. He paused, his gray eyes sweeping across every face in the crowd. And if any man here wants to argue that point, we can step away from this crowd and discuss it private-like. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Bull Garrison, for all his size and bluster, seemed to shrink back. Ryder turned back to Eleanor and spoke in that same quiet voice that somehow carried such weight. My name's Ryder Hale. I have a ranch about an hour's ride from here. You're welcome to come there. Stay as long as you need. Leave whenever you want. No obligations, no expectations, no strings attached. Just safety and a chance to catch your breath. Eleanor's mind reeled. This had to be a trick. Men didn't spend $3,000 for nothing. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper, her throat still raw. Something shifted in Ryder's expression, pain, quickly hidden, but real. Because I couldn't save my sister, he said, and I'll be damned if I stand by and watch another woman suffer when I can do something about it. The truth of it rang in his voice, and Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. For the first time in 3 weeks, she looked at a man and didn't see a threat. I don't have anything, she managed. I can't pay you back. Don't want you to. Ryder stepped back, giving her space. The only thing I want is for you to know you're safe now. That's all. That's everything. He turned to face the crowd again, his hand still resting casual-like on his gun. Anyone here got a problem with Miss Pike coming with me of her own free will? Silence. Even Silas Cobb seemed to have lost his voice. Good. Ryder looked back at Eleanor and held out his hand, not demanding, just offering. What do you say, Miss Pike? Want to get out of this place? Eleanor looked at his hand, weathered and scarred from hard work, strong but not grasping. She looked at his face, at the steady certainty in those gray eyes. She looked at the crowd, at all those hungry faces that had bit on her like she was horseflesh. Then she put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, careful of the rope burns. He helped her down from the platform, and Eleanor's legs nearly gave out after hours of standing. Ryder caught her elbow, steadying her without making her feel weak. "Easy now," he murmured. "One step at a time." They walked through the crowd together, and men who'd been bidding on her minutes ago now couldn't meet her eyes. Eleanor kept her head high, though her whole body shook with exhaustion and relief and terror and hope, all tangled together in a knot she couldn't begin to unravel. Ryder's horse waited patiently at the edge of the crowd, a sturdy roan with kind eyes and a patient temperament. Ryder untied a bedroll from behind the saddle and unfolded it to reveal a woman's dress, simple but clean and whole. "Figured you might want something more than—" He gestured at the tattered, filthy clothes she wore, the remains of the traveling dress she'd left Boston in a lifetime ago. Eleanor took the dress with shaking hands. "Where did you—" "Got a few women's things at the ranch," Ryder said, looking away to give her privacy. From before." His sister, Eleanor realized. The one he couldn't save. The one who haunted his eyes when he looked at her. She wanted to change right there in the street. Wanted to shed the clothes that carried 3 weeks of nightmare on their threads. But she couldn't make her fingers work the buttons. The trembling had spread from her hands to her whole body. "It's the fear leaving," Ryder said quietly, still not looking at her. "You've been running on it for so long, your body doesn't know what to do now that you're safe. It'll pass. Just takes time." "How do you know?" Eleanor whispered. "Because I've seen it before." His jaw tightened, and felt it myself more times than I care to count. He whistled, and another figure emerged from the shadows of a nearby building, a man about Ryder's age, shorter but broader, with dark hair and darker eyes that held a wary intelligence. He led 2 more horses, both of them saddled and ready to ride. "This is Mateo Cruz," Ryder said. "My partner. You can trust him same as you can trust me." Mateo nodded to Eleanor, his expression neutral but not unkind. "Ma'am, let's get you home." Home. Eleanor tested the word in her mind and found it foreign, almost frightening in its promise. Mateo held up a blanket, creating a screen between Eleanor and the street. Behind its shelter, she managed to strip off the ruined dress and pull on the clean one. It was too large, hanging loose on her frame. She'd lost weight in the past 3 weeks. But it was clean and whole and smelled like soap instead of fear. When she emerged from behind the blanket, Ryder had his back turned, checking his horse's girth. Mateo folded the blanket without comment and tied it back to his saddle. "Can you ride?" Ryder asked. Eleanor nodded. Uncle Theodore had insisted she learn back in Boston, taking her to a stable on the edge of the city every Sunday morning. It felt like remembering someone else's life. Mateo brought forward a gentle-looking bay mare. "This is Rosie. She's steady and smart. Won't spook easy." Eleanor put her foot in the stirrup and pulled herself up, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. The mare shifted beneath her, patient with her awkward movements. Ryder swung onto his roan with practiced ease and brought the horse alongside Eleanor's. "We'll take it slow," he said. "Ranch is about an hour if we don't push. You feel tired or sick or just need to stop, you say the word. Understood?" "Understood," Eleanor managed. They rode out of Silver Bend 3 abreast, Ryder on one side, Mateo on the other, Eleanor between them. As they left the town behind, Eleanor glanced back once. Silas Cobb was already counting his money. Bull Garrison stood swaying in the street. The crowd had dissolved back to their individual pursuits, the entertainment over. The auction block stood empty in the dust. "Don't look back," Ryder said gently. "Nothing there worth your attention anymore." Eleanor turned forward, toward the mountains rising purple and gold in the distance, toward whatever came next. Her hands still shook on the reins, her throat still ached, her wrists burned where the rope had cut deep. But she was riding away under her own power, and that was something. That was everything. They rode in silence for a while, leaving Silver Bend behind with each step of the horse's hooves. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The land here was different from anything Eleanor had seen, vast and open, with rolling hills covered in tall grass that moved like water in the wind. "You from back east?" Mateo asked after a while, his voice casual. "Boston," Eleanor answered, her own voice sounding strange in her ears. "I lived there with my uncle. He was taking me to Oregon. His brother has a mercantile there." "Long journey," Mateo observed. "We didn't make it very far." Eleanor's throat tightened with grief. "Bandits attacked our wagon 2 days out from Bannack. They killed Uncle Theodore. She stopped, unable to continue. "You don't have to talk about it," Ryder said. "Not unless you want to." But Eleanor found that she did want to, that the words had been building behind a dam for 3 weeks, and now that dam was cracking. "They took me to a camp. A man named Virgil Crane. He trades in people. Women, mostly. He had 6 others when I arrived. Some had been there for months." "Where's this camp?" Ryder's voice hadn't changed, but something in it made Eleanor look at him. His face was calm, but his eyes held the promise of violence. "North of Bannack, maybe 10 miles, hidden in a canyon." Eleanor paused. "The other women, they're still there." Ryder and Mateo exchanged a look, some communication passing between them that needed no words. "We'll take care of it," Mateo said quietly. "How?" Eleanor asked. "There's no law in Silver Bend, and Bannack's marshal is probably in Crane's pocket if—" "Don't need a marshal," Ryder said. "Territory's got its own way of handling men like that." Eleanor wanted to ask what he meant, but exhaustion was crashing over her in waves now that the immediate terror had passed. Her head swam, and she swayed in the saddle. "Steady!" Ryder was beside her in an instant, his hand on her shoulder, keeping her upright. "Not much farther. You see those cottonwoods up ahead? That's the boundary of my land." Eleanor squinted and saw them, a stand of tall trees marking the edge of a creek. Beyond them the land rolled away in gentle hills, and in the distance she could make out buildings. They crossed the creek at a shallow ford, the horses' hooves splashing in water that ran clear over smooth stones. The sun was touching the horizon now, turning everything to gold. Eleanor had never seen light like this, the way it made the whole world seem painted fresh every evening. "Welcome to the H-R," Ryder said as they climbed the far bank. "Home." The ranch house came into view, a sturdy structure of log and stone that had been built to last. It wasn't fancy, but it looked solid and real in a way that Eleanor's life hadn't felt for weeks. Behind it stood a barn, a smaller bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in distant fields, dark shapes against the golden grass. It looked like peace felt, if peace could take physical form. A woman emerged from the house as they rode into the yard, older, perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Eleanor, and her expression shifted from curiosity to understanding to fierce protectiveness. "Ryder Hale," she said, her voice carrying the accent of someone raised south of the border. "You brought home another stray." "This is Eleanor Pike," Ryder said, dismounting. "Eleanor, this is Maria Vasquez. She keeps this place running whether I like it or not." "Mostly whether he likes it or not," Maria agreed, but her voice was warm. She moved to Eleanor's horse and looked up with kind eyes. "Can you dismount, child, or do you need help?" "I can," Eleanor started to say, but her legs had other ideas. The moment she swung down from the saddle, they buckled. Ryder caught her before she hit the ground, his arms strong and sure. "Easy now. You've been running on fear and not much else. When did you last eat?" Eleanor tried to remember and couldn't. "Yesterday morning, maybe. There was bread, I think." Maria made a sound of pure disgust. "Inside. Now. I'll make food and you'll eat and then you'll sleep. Everything else can wait." Ryder carried Eleanor toward the house despite her weak protests. "No arguments," he said firmly. "You weigh about as much as a saddle right now, and you're going to accept help whether you like it or not." He set her down gently in a chair at a large wooden table in the kitchen. The room smelled like bread and coffee, and something savory that made Eleanor's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. Maria was already moving, pulling things from cupboards and drawers with the efficiency of someone who'd run a household for decades. Within minutes, she'd set before Eleanor a plate of beans and cornbread, a glass of water, and a bowl of stew that steamed invitingly. Eat slowly, Maria instructed. Your stomach's not used to food. Too fast and you'll be sick. Eleanor tried to obey, but the moment the first spoonful of stew touched her tongue, she had to fight the urge to weep. It was warm and flavorful and real, proof that the world still held good things, still held comfort. Ryder sat across from her, sipping coffee, watching her eat with that same steady calm that seemed to be his default state. Mateo had disappeared, probably to tend the horses, and Maria bustled about the kitchen making disapproving sounds about men who didn't know how to take care of themselves, let alone rescue women. You have a beautiful home, Eleanor said between bites, needing to fill the silence with something other than the sound of her own desperate eating. It's a roof and walls, Ryder said, but it's solid, and it's safe, and right now that's all that matters. The dress? Eleanor gestured at what she wore. You said you had women's things from before. Your sister? Pain flickered across Ryder's face, quick as lightning, but just as real. Sarah. Yeah. She lived here for a couple years before. He paused, choosing words carefully. Before she died. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate, but Eleanor meant them with her whole heart. Me too. Ryder took another sip of coffee. She was 19, full of life and fire and dreams. Raiders hit a neighboring ranch and Sarah was visiting. By the time I got there, he stopped, his jaw clenching. I was too late. Couldn't save her. Couldn't save any of them. Eleanor understood then, really understood, why he'd spent $3,000 on a stranger. Not because he wanted anything from her, but because saving her was a way of saving Sarah, even if it was years too late. That's why you stepped in today, she said quietly. That's why I'll always step in, Ryder corrected. When I see someone who needs help and I've got the means to give it, because I know what it's like to wish someone had done the same for people I loved. Maria set a cup of tea in front of Eleanor, something herbal that smelled like mint and honey. Drink, it'll help you sleep. Thank you. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the warm cup, careful of her rope-burned wrists. The simple kindness of it, hot tea, food, a chair to sit in without fear, threatened to undo her completely. She forced herself to eat slowly, methodically, even though her body screamed for her to devour everything in sight. The stew was rich with meat and vegetables, the cornbread sweet and crumbling. She couldn't remember food ever tasting this good. Mateo returned as she was finishing, bringing with him the smell of horses and hay. He nodded to Ryder. Horses are settled. I checked the perimeter. All quiet. Good. Ryder stood, moving to a cabinet and pulling out a small tin. He brought it back to the table and pushed it toward Eleanor. Salve for your wrists. Maria makes it. Works better than anything you can buy in town. Eleanor looked at her wrists, at the raw, angry wounds where the rope had bitten through skin. She'd been trying not to think about them, but now that Ryder mentioned it, they burned like fire. I can do it, she started to say, but Maria had already taken the tin from Ryder's hand. You can barely hold a spoon without shaking, Maria said, not unkindly. Let me. The older woman's hands were gentle as she spread the salve over Eleanor's wounds. It stung at first, then cooled, easing the burn. Maria worked in silence, her touch practiced and sure. There, she said finally, replacing the lid on the tin. Tomorrow we'll bandage them proper, but tonight you need to sleep more than anything. I'll show you to your room, Ryder said. He picked up an oil lamp from a shelf and led Eleanor from the kitchen through a short hallway. The house was simple but well built, with solid furniture and clean floors. He stopped at a door near the end of the hall and pushed it open. The room beyond was small but clean, with a bed covered in a quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the darkening prairie. Someone, probably Maria, had already laid out a nightgown and left fresh towels on the dresser. This was Sarah's room, Ryder said, his voice soft. I couldn't bring myself to change anything, but she'd want someone to use it, not let it sit empty gathering dust. Eleanor stepped inside, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old memories. On the dresser sat a small collection of items, a hairbrush, a few ribbons, a book of poetry. You don't have to decide anything tonight, Ryder continued. You can stay here as long as you need, days, weeks, months. And when you're ready to move on, whether that's to Oregon to find your uncle's brother or somewhere else entirely, I'll help you get there safely. No obligations. Eleanor turned to look at him, this man who'd paid a fortune for her freedom and asked nothing in return. Why? She asked again. Why do all this for a stranger? Ryder was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes reflecting the lamplight. Because kindness is free, he said finally, and cruelty's already taken too much from this world. Figured it was time to balance the scales a bit. He paused at the door. Get some rest, Eleanor. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out what comes next. He left, pulling the door closed behind him, and Eleanor was alone for the first time in 3 weeks. Really alone. Not locked in a room, not tied and guarded, but alone because she was safe enough to be so. She moved to the window and looked out at the night. Stars were emerging, more than she'd ever seen in Boston, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The prairie stretched away into darkness, vast and empty and beautiful. Eleanor's hands went to her face, and the tears came then, not the silent, terrified tears of the auction block, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for Uncle Theodore, who'd promised her adventure and gotten death. She cried for the 3 weeks of nightmare that had just ended. She cried for Sarah Hale, who'd never gotten a second chance at life. And she cried for herself, for the Eleanor Pike who died in that bandit attack, and for whatever new version of herself would have to emerge from these ashes. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the barn a horse nickered softly. The sounds of life continuing, the world turning, time moving forward whether she was ready or not. Eleanor Pike dried her eyes, pulled on the nightgown Maria had left, and climbed into bed. The mattress was soft, the quilt warm, the pillow clean. Every sensation was almost too much after weeks of hard ground and rough treatment. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought about Ryder Hale's words on the auction block. You'll only know joy from here on. It had seemed impossible then, a promise too large to believe. But lying in this quiet room, in this house where no one would hurt her, Eleanor Pike let herself believe, just for a moment, that joy might actually be possible after all. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting down the hallway. For one disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was, her heart hammered with panic, her body tensing for whatever new threat the day would bring. Then memory returned, the auction, Ryder Hale's quiet voice, the ride to the ranch, this room that had belonged to a dead girl who'd never gotten her second chance. She sat up slowly, her body aching in 1,000 places. The rope burns on her wrist throbbed with each heartbeat, and muscles she'd forgotten she had screamed their protest at weeks of sleeping on hard ground. But the bed beneath her was soft, the quilt warm, and through the window she could see nothing but open sky and rolling prairie. No bars, no guards, no men with hungry eyes. A soft knock at the door made her jump. Eleanor? Maria's voice, gentle but practical. I have warm water for washing and clean clothes. May I come in? Yes, Eleanor managed, her voice still rough from disuse and tears. Maria entered carrying a pitcher that steamed gently and a bundle of fabric over her arm. She set the pitcher on the washstand and laid out the clothes on the bed. Another simple dress, this one in a soft blue that looked like it would actually fit, along with undergarments and stockings. These were Sarah's too, Maria said, seeing Eleanor's hesitation. Ryder wants you to have them. Says his sister would have liked knowing they were being used instead of sitting in a drawer gathering moths. Eleanor ran her fingers over the fabric. It was well made, carefully mended in places, loved. I don't know how to thank you, any of you. You don't need to thank us for being decent human beings. Maria poured water into the basin. That's just the bare minimum of what people should do for each other. Now wash up and get dressed. Breakfast is ready, and Ryder wants to talk to you about some things. The older woman left, and Eleanor stood at the washstand, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above it. The woman looking back was a stranger, hollow-eyed, gaunt, with bruises shadowing her cheekbones and fear etched into every line of her face. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her shoulders, and her skin had the grayish cast of someone who'd spent too long being terrified. She poured water into the basin and began to wash, hissing as the liquid touched her raw wrists. But the pain was clean, honest. Not the pain of ropes biting into skin, but the pain of healing beginning. She scrubbed away 3 weeks of dirt and fear, watching the water in the basin turn murky. When she dressed in the blue calico dress and run Sarah's hairbrush through her hair until it fell in somewhat orderly waves, Eleanor made her way to the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the sounds drifting from that warm, bright room, the clatter of dishes, Maria's voice humming something in Spanish, the deeper rumble of male conversation. She paused in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. What did people do in normal life? How did breakfast work when you weren't terrified or tied up or waiting to be sold? Ryder looked up from his coffee and smiled. Not a big expression, just a slight upward curve of his mouth, but it reached his eyes and made them warm. Morning? You sleep all right? Better than I have in weeks, Eleanor admitted, stepping into the room. Mateo sat at the table too, along with another man she hadn't met, younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and an easy grin. This is Jesse Colton, Ryder said. Works the ranch with us. Jesse, this is Eleanor Pike. Ma'am. Jesse stood, hat in hand, and nodded respectfully. Welcome to the H-Bar-R. Maria pushed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Eleanor before she could even sit down. Eat. You need meat on those bones. Eleanor ate slowly, trying not to wolf down the food despite her body's demands. The men talked around her about ranch business, fence repairs, cattle rotations, a problem with the well by the north pasture. Normal things. Boring things. Things that had nothing to do with violence or fear or survival. When she'd finished eating, Ryder pushed his own plate aside and looked at her directly. I need to ask you some questions about Virgil Crane and his operation. I know it's not easy to talk about, but those other women you mentioned, they need help too. Eleanor's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She'd known this was coming, had been half dreading and half hoping for it. What do you want to know? Everything. How many men does he have? What kind of weapons? How's the camp laid out? How many women are there? Over the next hour, Eleanor told them everything she could remember. The canyon north of Bannock, hidden behind a narrow entrance that looked like solid rock until you were right on top of it. The 6 women who'd been there when she arrived, Mary from St. Louis, barely 16, who cried every night, Rosa from Santa Fe, who'd stopped speaking entirely, Margaret and Jane, sisters from Ohio, who clung to each other like drowning swimmers, and 2 others whose names Eleanor had never learned because they'd been sold the day after she arrived. She described Virgil Crane, a thin man with cold eyes and a voice like gravel, who ran his operation like a business and treated human suffering as just another commodity. His men numbered about 8, all of them hard cases with guns and no conscience. They kept the women in a crude barracks, guarded day and night, feeding them just enough to keep them alive and moving them every few weeks to different buyers across the territory. He's got connections, Eleanor said, her voice shaking slightly. Buyers in Denver, Salt Lake, even San Francisco. He told me I was lucky I was educated, said I'd fetch a better price than the others. Ryder's jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek. Mateo's expression had gone hard as stone. Even Jesse, who'd probably seen his share of ugliness in this hard country, looked sick. When's the next auction? Ryder asked. I don't know. He moves them around. Silver Bend was just one stop. Eleanor's hands were shaking now, coffee sloshing in the cup. Those women are still there, Mary and Rosa, and we'll get them out. Ryder's voice carried absolute certainty. All of them, and we'll make sure Virgil Crane never hurts another soul. How? Eleanor set down the cup before she spilled it. There's no law, no marshal who'd care, no— There's law, Mateo said quietly, just not the kind that wears a badge. Eleanor looked between the 3 men and saw something in their faces that made her understand. This wasn't going to be a legal operation. This was going to be frontier justice, swift, brutal, and final. I want to help, she heard herself say. No. Ryder's response was immediate. Absolutely not. But I know the layout. I know— You know where to draw them a map, which you'll do. Ryder's tone left no room for argument. But you're not going anywhere near that place again. You've been through enough. Eleanor wanted to argue, but the relief that flooded through her at his words told her he was right. The thought of seeing that canyon again, of facing Crane and his men, made her stomach clench with terror. "When?" she asked instead. "Tomorrow night," Mateo said. "We'll need today to plan and gather some help. There's men in these parts who'll ride with us for something like this." Jesse nodded. "The Donovan brothers will come. Maybe Bill Hendricks from the Bar T. Men with strong backs and stronger principles." Maria made a sound of disapproval from where she stood at the stove. Men and their violence. Always it comes to this. "Sometimes it has to," Ryder said quietly. "Sometimes there's no other way to stop evil than to meet it head on." Eleanor spent the rest of the morning drawing maps on pieces of paper Ryder provided. The canyon's entrance, the layout of the camp, where the guards usually stood watch, where the women were kept. Her hands shook as she sketched, memories flooding back with each line she drew. By noon, riders had started arriving. The Donovan brothers, twins who looked like they'd been carved from granite, with identical scars and identical expressions of grim determination. Bill Hendricks, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen too much. A man named Dutch, who said little but carried 2 guns with the ease of long familiarity. Others came throughout the afternoon, men who'd heard what Ryder was planning and wanted to be part of putting it right. Eleanor stayed in the house while they gathered in the yard, their voices drifting through the windows as they made plans. She helped Maria with cooking, grateful for something to do with her hands, some way to feel useful. "You care for him," Maria said suddenly, kneading bread dough with strong, practiced movements. Eleanor looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. "Who?" "Ryder." Maria's dark eyes were knowing. "I see how you look at him, like he hung the moon." "He saved my life," Eleanor said carefully. "Of course I'm grateful. Gratitude is one thing. What I see in your eyes is something else." Maria shaped the dough into loaves. "But be careful, child. Ryder's a good man, maybe the best I've known, but he's been broken by what happened to Sarah. Sometimes broken things don't heal right, no matter how much you want them to." Eleanor thought about that as she finished the potatoes. Was it more than gratitude? She barely knew Ryder Hale. 24 hours ago, she'd been standing on an auction block, and now she was in his kitchen thinking about what? The steadiness in his gray eyes, the quiet strength in his voice, the way he'd looked at her not with hunger but with genuine concern. That evening, the men gathered in the barn for their final planning. Eleanor stayed in the house with Maria, listening to the murmur of voices through the walls. She tried to read one of Sarah's books, a collection of poetry that had her name inscribed on the inside cover in careful script, but the words blurred together. When Ryder finally came back inside, it was full dark and the other men had dispersed to their own homes or bedrolls in the bunkhouse. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, but his expression was resolute. "We ride out at dawn," he told Eleanor. "Should be back by tomorrow evening, one way or another." "Be careful," Eleanor said, the words inadequate for the churning anxiety in her gut. "Always am." He paused, then added more softly, "You'll be safe here. Maria and Jesse will stay. Jesse's young, but he's good with a rifle, and Maria—" He smiled slightly. "Well, I'd rather face down a grizzly than Maria Vasquez when she's protecting someone." "I heard that," Maria called from the kitchen. Ryder's smile widened fractionally, then faded. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. What we're doing tomorrow, it's not going to be pretty. Men like Crane don't surrender peaceful-like. There's going to be violence." "I know," Eleanor said, "and I know what you're risking, all of you." "We're not risking anything that isn't worth it." Ryder's gray eyes held hers. "Those women deserve the same chance you got. The chance to be free, to be safe, to rebuild their lives. Whatever it takes to give them that, it's worth it." He said goodnight and headed to his own room, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and her fears and the prayer she didn't know if anyone was listening to, that these men who were riding out to save strangers would all come home whole. The next day crawled by like years. Eleanor tried to keep busy, helping Maria with laundry and cooking, mending clothes that didn't need mending, anything to keep her hands occupied and her mind from imagining all the ways things could go wrong. Jesse stayed close to the house, his rifle always within reach, his young face serious with responsibility. The sun climbed to its zenith and began its descent. Shadows lengthened across the prairie. Eleanor found herself at the window every few minutes, scanning the horizon for riders that wouldn't appear for hours yet. "Watched pot never boils," Maria said, not looking up from the shirt she was mending. "I can't help it." Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "They've been gone for hours." "They'll come back. Ryder always comes back." But Maria's hand stilled on her sewing, and Eleanor knew the older woman was worried too. Sunset painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Eleanor made coffee that no one drank and food that no one ate. Jesse paced the porch, his eyes on the northern horizon. Even the ranch's dog seemed restless, whining and prowling the yard. Full dark fell, and still no riders appeared. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, and tried not to think about all the things that could have gone wrong. An ambush. More men than they'd expected. Someone getting hurt, getting killed. Ryder lying somewhere in that canyon with— "Stop," Maria said firmly. "You'll drive yourself mad with thinking." "How do you do it?" Eleanor asked. "How do you stand it, waiting and not knowing?" "Practice." Maria's voice was soft. "Too much practice. I've been waiting for men to come home from dangerous places since I was younger than you. My husband, my sons, now Ryder and the others. You learn to wait, and you learn to pray, and you learn that worrying doesn't change anything except your own peace of mind." Eleanor tried to take comfort in the words, but her heart kept hammering against her ribs, her breath coming shallow. She thought about Ryder's steady gray eyes, his quiet voice, the way he'd looked at her on that auction block and seen a person instead of property. The thought of him hurt or dead because he'd tried to save women he didn't even know, women he'd only heard about from her, made her stomach twist. 9 o'clock came and went. 10. 11. Jesse had given up pacing and now sat on the porch steps, rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness. Maria had taken up position in her rocking chair, knitting something with sharp, angry movements. Eleanor couldn't sit still, couldn't stop moving, couldn't— "Riders," Jesse said suddenly, standing. "Coming from the north." Eleanor was at the window in an instant, her heart in her throat. In the moonlight she could see shapes emerging from the darkness, horses, many of them, moving at a steady pace toward the ranch. Maria lit lanterns and brought them out to the porch. The light spilled into the yard as the riders came closer, resolving into individual shapes. Eleanor counted them frantically, 1, 2, 5, 8, more, trying to see if anyone was missing, if anyone was hurt. Ryder rode at the front on his roan, still upright, still whole. Relief hit Eleanor so hard her knees went weak. Behind him came Mateo and the others, and between them, women. 6 of them, riding double with the men or being led on spare horses. They looked exhausted, terrified, but alive. The riders pulled into the yard, and suddenly everything was motion and noise. Maria was already moving, her arms open, speaking rapid Spanish as she helped the women down from the horses. Jesse ran to take the reins, to help settle the animals. Eleanor stood frozen on the porch, watching it all unfold. Ryder dismounted and walked toward her, and in the lamplight she could see blood on his sleeve, dust coating every inch of him, exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. But his eyes found hers, and something in them made her breath catch. "We got them all," he said simply. "Every last one." Eleanor's hand went to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Are you hurt?" "Scratch, nothing serious." He looked back at the women being helped into the house. "They're going to need time and care and a lot of patience, but they're safe now." One of the women broke away from Maria's gentle guidance and ran straight for Eleanor, nearly knocking her over with the force of her embrace. "Eleanor! Oh God, Eleanor! I thought we'd never see you again." It was Mary, the 16-year-old from St. Louis. She was crying, shaking, holding on to Eleanor like a drowning person holds a life rope. Eleanor wrapped her arms around the girl and held tight, her own tears flowing freely now. "You're safe," Eleanor whispered. "We're all safe now." The other women crowded close. Rosa, silent Rosa, who touched Eleanor's face with trembling fingers as if making sure she was real. The sisters from Ohio, Margaret and Jane, holding hands like they had in the canyon. Two others Eleanor hadn't met, both looking shell-shocked but alive, blessedly alive. Maria herded them all inside with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. Everyone inside. There's food and water and beds. Come now, come. Eleanor looked back at Ryder, still standing in the yard. What happened to Crane? Something cold passed through Ryder's expression. He won't be hurting anyone else. None of them will. Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. Frontier justice. Swift and final. She waited to feel horror at the thought of men dying, even evil men. Instead, all she felt was a bone-deep satisfaction that monsters had been put down. The house became organized chaos. Maria moved like a whirlwind, setting out food, drawing water for washing, pulling out blankets and pillows. The men who'd ridden with Ryder stayed long enough to make sure everyone was settled, then rode off into the night toward their own homes, their work done. Mateo caught Ryder's arm as he was heading toward the house. You need to get that cut looked at. It's fine. Ryder. Mateo's tone brooked no argument. You lost blood. Let Maria patch you up before you keel over and scare everyone. Reluctantly, Ryder let himself be led inside. Eleanor was helping Mary eat some soup when she saw him sit heavily at the table, his face gray with exhaustion. Maria was already there with her medical supplies, scissors cutting away his blood-soaked sleeve. The wound beneath wasn't as bad as Eleanor had feared. A long cut across his upper arm, not deep, but still bleeding sluggishly. A bullet graze, she realized with a chill. Hold still, Maria ordered, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. Ryder didn't flinch, just stared at the table while she worked. Eleanor found herself moving toward him without conscious thought. She stood beside his chair and, after a moment's hesitation, placed her hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. Thank you, she said quietly, for all of them. For me. You already thanked me. I'll probably keep thanking you for the rest of my life, Eleanor said. Because what you did, what all of you did, there aren't words for it. Ryder's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his shoulder, his rough palm warm against her fingers. You would have done the same. I don't know if I would have. I'd like to think so, but I don't know if I'm that brave. Bravery isn't about not being scared. Ryder's thumb brushed across her knuckles. It's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. You've got that kind of courage. Saw it in you on that auction block, when you stood there with your head high, even though you were shaking. Maria finished bandaging his arm and straightened with a satisfied nod. There. Don't do anything stupid with it for a few days and it'll heal clean. The house gradually settled into an uneasy quiet. The women were distributed among the available beds, some in Sarah's room with Eleanor, some in the bunkhouse, Maria taking 2 into her own quarters. They were fed, washed, given clean clothes, small kindnesses that meant everything after weeks or months of cruelty. Eleanor sat with Mary and Rosa in Sarah's room long after the lamps had been turned down, just being present while they talked or cried or sat in stunned silence. Mary couldn't stop shaking, her 16-year-old face ancient with trauma. Rosa finally spoke, her voice rusty from disuse, saying over and over in Spanish, Gracias, gracias a Dios. It was past midnight when Eleanor finally made her way back to the kitchen, thinking everyone would be asleep. Instead, she found Ryder sitting alone at the table, a glass of whiskey in front of him, staring at nothing. Can't sleep? She asked softly. He looked up, shadows under his eyes. Never can after something like that. Mind keeps replaying it all. Eleanor sat across from him without asking permission. Was it bad? Bad enough. Ryder took a small sip of whiskey. We got there just before dawn, came in from 3 sides. Most of Crane's men were still sleeping. We gave them a chance to surrender. They didn't? 2 of them did. Smart men. The others, he shook his head. Crane himself went for his gun, didn't give us a choice. Eleanor thought about Virgil Crane, his cold eyes and colder voice, the casual cruelty with which he'd discussed selling human beings. She couldn't find it in herself to mourn him. The women were terrified, Ryder continued. When we broke open that barracks, they thought we were more buyers, more threats. Took us 20 minutes just to convince them we were there to help. His jaw clenched. What kind of world is this where women have learned to fear rescue? The kind where men like you are needed, Eleanor said firmly. The kind where someone has to stand up and say no more. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the house creaking around them, the prairie wind whistling softly outside. Eleanor studied Ryder's face in the lamplight, the strong jaw, the lines around his eyes, the weariness that ran bone deep. Your sister would be proud of you, she said finally. Pain flickered across his expression. Sarah would have done it herself if she'd had the chance. She was fierce that way, used to get so angry about injustice, couldn't stand by and watch people suffer. She sounds wonderful. She was. Ryder's voice was soft, full of light and fire, could make anyone laugh, even on the darkest days. When she died, it felt like the sun went out. Eleanor's hand moved across the table, covering his. I'm sorry you lost her. Me too. His fingers curled around hers. But maybe saving these women is a way of honoring her memory. Maybe it's what she would have wanted. I know it is, Eleanor said with certainty. They stayed like that, hands linked across the scarred wooden table, neither speaking, just existing together in the quiet house. Outside, the moon sailed high and cold, and somewhere in the barn a horse whinnied softly. Life continuing, the world turning, tomorrow coming whether they were ready or not. Finally, Ryder stood, gently releasing her hand. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy. All these women will need help figuring out what comes next. What does come next? Eleanor asked. For them, I mean. Where will they go? Wherever they want. Ryder moved to bank the fire in the stove. Some might have families to return to. Others might want to start fresh somewhere new. We'll help them however we can. And me? The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. What comes next for me? Ryder turned to look at her, his gray eyes steady and sure. That's up to you, Eleanor. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. A day, a month, a year, forever. Your choice. But I meant what I said on that auction block. You'll only know joy from here on, if I have anything to say about it. Eleanor's heart did something complicated in her chest, equal parts fear and hope, and something else she wasn't ready to name. I don't know what I want yet. I don't even know who I am anymore. Then stay until you figure it out. Ryder smiled, that small upward curve that transformed his face. No rush, no expectations, just stay. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice, and Ryder headed toward his room. At the doorway, he paused and looked back. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad you're here. Not because of what happened or how you got here, but just because you're you, and I think Sarah would have liked you. Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and her racing heart, and the terrifying, wonderful possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to heal. The days that followed the rescue blurred together in a rhythm of healing and routine. The H-Bar-R Ranch, which had been quiet for so long with just Ryder, Mateo, Maria, and Jesse, suddenly bustled with life and purpose. 7 women, each carrying her own burden of trauma, each finding her own path back to something resembling normalcy. Eleanor fell into the role of helping without quite meaning to. She understood what these women were feeling in a way that Maria's kindness and Ryder's protectiveness couldn't quite reach. She'd stood where they stood, felt what they felt, knew the particular terror of being reduced to property. So she sat with Mary through nightmares, helped Rosa remember how to speak more than a few words at a time, and listened when Margaret and Jane needed to talk about the brother they'd lost trying to protect them. 2 weeks passed in this strange new life. The ranch hands worked the cattle and mended fences while the house became a sanctuary. Some of the women started venturing outside, helping Maria in the garden, learning to ride again under Jesse's patient instruction. Others stayed close to the house, not yet ready to face the open spaces of the prairie. Eleanor found herself spending more and more time with Ryder, though neither of them quite acknowledged what was happening between them. He'd seek her out in the evenings, suggesting a walk to check on the horses, or a ride to inspect the far pastures. They'd talk about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the profound to the mundane, always easy, always comfortable. "You're good with them," Ryder said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky purple and gold. "The other women, I mean, they trust you." Eleanor tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know what they're going through. That helps." "It's more than that." Ryder's gaze was thoughtful. "You've got strength in you, Eleanor Pike. The kind that bends but doesn't break. The kind that helps others find their own strength." She felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I don't feel strong most days. I feel like I'm barely holding myself together." That's what strength looks like sometimes. Not grand gestures or fearless charges, just getting up every morning and choosing to keep going. They fell into comfortable silence, watching the light fade. Eleanor had learned that Ryder didn't fill silences with empty words, that he was content to just exist beside her without needing constant conversation. She'd come to treasure these quiet moments almost as much as their talks. Then, on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the rescue, everything changed. Eleanor was in the garden with Rosa and Mary, teaching them how to tell the difference between weeds and vegetables, when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Multiple riders, moving fast. Her heart seized with instant fear, the old terror flooding back. Bandits. Crane's men somehow returned. More threats, more violence, more easy. Ryder's voice came from behind her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "It's all right. I know these riders." But his jaw was tight, and Eleanor could feel tension radiating from him like heat from a stove. Whatever was coming, it wasn't entirely welcome. 3 men rode into the yard on horses that were lathered with sweat from hard riding. They were rough-looking, dressed in trail-worn clothes and carrying themselves with the casual confidence of men who were comfortable with violence. The one in the lead had a scarred face and mean eyes that swept across the ranch like he was calculating its worth. "Ryder Hale," the scarred man said, not bothering to dismount. "Been looking for you. Jack Carlson." Ryder's voice was flat, empty of warmth. "What brings you to my land?" "Heard you pulled off quite the rescue a few weeks back. Verge Crane's operation." Carlson spat into the dust. "Verge was a business associate of mine. I'm here to collect what's owed." Eleanor felt ice form in her stomach. She moved instinctively closer to Ryder, and his hand found hers, squeezing once in reassurance. "Crane's dead," Ryder said calmly. "His operation's shut down. There's nothing to collect." "See, that's where you're wrong." Carlson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Those women you took? They represent a considerable investment. Someone's got to pay for that loss. They're not investments, they're people." Ryder's tone could have frozen fire. "And they're under my protection now, all of them." "That's so?" Carlson finally dismounted, his 2 companions following suit. All 3 were armed, and they positioned themselves with the easy practice of men who'd been in fights before. "Protection's expensive, Hale. How much you willing to pay to keep it?" Eleanor could feel the tension ratcheting up with each word. From the corner of her eye, she saw Mateo emerge from the barn, rifle in hand. Jesse appeared from the bunkhouse, also armed. Maria hustled the other women inside the house, her face grim. "I'm not paying you anything," Ryder said. "I'm asking you politely to leave my land. Now." Carlson's laugh was ugly. "Polite? That's rich. See, I don't think you understand your situation here, Hale. Verge had partners, people who expect a return on their investments. You've cost us a lot of money. One way or another, that debt gets paid. The only people who owe debts are the ones who sold human beings like cattle." Ryder's hand moved toward his gun, a subtle shift that Carlson noticed immediately. "You want to press this? We can settle it right here. But I promise you, it won't end the way you're hoping." For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, feel the prairie wind on her face, smell the dust and horse sweat in rising violence. She thought about running, about hiding, about all the times in the past month when she'd been helpless and terrified. Then she thought about Ryder's words. Strength isn't grand gestures, it's choosing to keep going. She stepped forward, positioning herself beside Ryder instead of behind him. His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't tell her to move. "These women are free," Eleanor said, her voice shaking but clear. "They're not going back. Not to you, not to anyone. And if you want to take them, you'll have to go through all of us. Carlson's gaze shifted to her, assessment and dismissal in his eyes. You're that Pike woman, the educated one. Verge said you'd fetch top dollar in San Francisco. He smiled. Maybe I'll just take you as payment and call it even. Ryder moved so fast Eleanor barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, the next his gun was drawn and pointed straight at Carlson's head. Touch her and you're dead before you hit the ground. Carlson's companions went for their own weapons, but Mateo's rifle swung to cover them, and Jesse's voice called from the bunkhouse window, I've got you in my sights too. Don't be stupid. The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like hours. Eleanor could see Carlson calculating odds, weighing options, deciding whether his pride was worth dying for. Finally, he raised his hand slowly. Easy now. We're all reasonable men here. You've got 10 seconds to get on your horses and ride out, Ryder said, his gun never wavering. After that, I stopped being reasonable. Carlson backed toward his horse, his companions following. This isn't over, Hale. Verge had friends, powerful friends. They're not going to let this go. Neither am I. Ryder's eyes were cold as winter stone. You come back here. You come threatening these women or my people again, and there won't be any talking. Understand? Carlson swung into his saddle, his face twisted with anger. You're making enemies you can't afford, Hale. Already got plenty of enemies. A few more won't make much difference. The three men rode out, pushing their horses hard toward the northern boundary. Eleanor watched them go, her whole body shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Ryder holstered his gun and turned to her, his hands going to her shoulders. Are you all right? I don't know, Eleanor admitted. Are they really gone? For now. Ryder's expression was grim. But Carlson wasn't bluffing. He'll be back, probably with more men. This isn't over. The house that evening was heavy with tension. The women who'd been making such progress toward healing had taken 10 steps backward, the encounter reminding them that safety was fragile, that threats could appear at any moment. Mary cried herself to sleep. Rosa went silent again. Margaret and Jane locked themselves in their room. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at a cup of tea gone cold. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Ryder standing in the doorway, 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey in his hands. Figured you might need this more than tea, he said, setting a glass in front of her and pouring a measure of amber liquid. Eleanor took a sip and gasped as it burned down her throat. How do you drink this? Practice. Ryder poured his own glass and sat across from her. A necessity. They drank in silence for a while. Finally, Eleanor said, This is my fault. If I hadn't told you about the other women, if you hadn't rescued them. Stop. Ryder's tone was firm. This is Crane's fault and Carlson's fault, and the fault of every man who thinks he can buy and sell human beings. It's not yours, and I won't hear you say otherwise. But now you're in danger, all of you, because of me. We were in danger the moment we decided to do the right thing. Ryder reached across the table and took her hand, and I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. Those women deserve to be saved. You deserve to be saved. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, his rough and scarred, hers still bearing the marks of rope burns. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me. Too late for that. Ryder's smile was sad. You already got me hurt, Eleanor Pike. Her heart stopped. What? He tapped his chest right over his heart. Here. You got me hurt here, and I don't think there's any fixing it. Eleanor stared at him, understanding dawning slowly. Ryder, I know it's too soon, he said quickly. I know you're still healing, still figuring out who you are and what you want. I'm not asking for anything, Eleanor. I wanted you to know. When I look at you, I don't see the woman from the auction block. I see someone strong and brave and beautiful, someone who makes me laugh, someone who makes me want to be better than I am. I see hope. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I can be what you need. I'm broken, Ryder. Damaged. We're all broken in one way or another. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. The question is whether we're broken in ways that fit together. She thought about that, about the past weeks, about how easy it had been to talk to him, to be near him, to trust him. She thought about the way her heart sped up when he smiled, the way she looked for him in every room, the way his presence made her feel safe and scared and alive all at once. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of me?" "Of this. Of feeling anything for anyone. Of being vulnerable again." Ryder nodded slowly. "That's fair. Fear's a reasonable response after what you've been through, but Eleanor, fear's also what keeps us from living. And I think Sarah would tell you that surviving isn't the same as living. Your sister sounds very wise." "She had her moments." Ryder's smile was bittersweet. "She used to tell me that the heart knows what it wants before the head figures it out. Said the trick was learning to listen." Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to listen to her heart. It was hammering against her ribs, fast and frightened, but also hopeful. Was that what this feeling was? This terrifying, wonderful sensation of standing on the edge of something huge and unknowable? "I think I might be falling for you," she said quietly, the words barely audible. "And it scares me more than anything Carlson could threaten." Ryder stood and came around the table, pulling her gently to her feet. His hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "Then let's be scared together. Let's figure this out one day at a time. No promises, no expectations, just us, however that looks." Eleanor looked up into his gray eyes and saw her own fear reflected there, along with something else. Hope. Love. The possibility of joy. "I'd like that," she whispered. He kissed her then, soft and careful, asking rather than demanding. Eleanor's hands came up to grip his shirt, anchoring herself to this moment, to this feeling, to him. The kiss was gentle, almost chaste, but it held the promise of everything they might become. When they pulled apart, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "We don't have to figure everything out tonight. We've got time." But even as he said it, Eleanor saw the worry in his eyes. Time was exactly what they might not have. Carlson would be back, probably with more men, more threats, more violence. The fragile peace they'd built here was under siege. The next morning, Ryder gathered everyone in the kitchen, the women, Mateo, Jesse, Maria. His face was serious as he laid out the situation. "Carlson's going to come back," he said without preamble. "Probably with more men. We need to be ready. That means everyone who can handle a gun learns to shoot. It means keeping watch day and night. It means being smart and careful and aware." "Or," Margaret spoke up, her voice small, "we could leave. Go somewhere else. We're the ones they want." "No." Ryder's response was immediate and firm. "You're not leaving. This is your home now, same as it's mine, and we don't abandon home when things get hard." "But we're putting you in danger," Jane protested. "I'm already in danger," Ryder said. "Stood up against Crane, made enemies of his network. Whether you stay or go doesn't change that. But if you stay, we face it together. And together, we're stronger than whatever Carlson can throw at us." Over the next week, the ranch transformed into something between a home and a fortress. Ryder taught Eleanor and the other women how to shoot, patiently correcting their grips, their stances, their aim. Mateo and Jesse reinforced the barn and bunkhouse, created better sight lines, stockpiled ammunition. Maria showed everyone how to barricade doors and windows, how to move quickly through the house to defendable positions. Eleanor discovered she had a decent eye for shooting. The rifle felt foreign in her hands at first, heavy and lethal, but Ryder's patient instruction helped her find confidence. She learned to breathe, to aim, to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. "Good," Ryder said after she'd hit the target 3 times in a row. "You're a natural." "I don't want to shoot anyone," Eleanor said, lowering the rifle. "I know, but if it comes to choosing between your life and someone trying to hurt you, I want you to be able to make that choice." His eyes were serious. "I need to know you can protect yourself if I can't get to you." The thought of Ryder not being able to reach her, of him being hurt or killed while she stood helpless, sent ice through Eleanor's veins. "Then teach me everything. I won't be helpless again. I won't." He did. Over the following days, Eleanor learned to shoot rifles and pistols, to reload quickly, to judge distances and wind. She learned where to position herself for the best defensive advantage, how to move through the house using cover, how to think tactically instead of emotionally. But beyond the preparation for violence, something else was growing between her and Ryder. Stolen moments in the barn, conversations that stretched late into the night, his hand finding hers whenever they were near each other. It was tentative and careful, both of them feeling their way through unfamiliar territory, but it was real. One evening, Ryder took her riding to a place he'd never shown anyone except Sarah, a hidden meadow about an hour north of the ranch, sheltered by hills and dominated by a massive pine tree that had to be 100 years old. They dismounted and walked to the base of the tree, where the ground was carpeted in soft grass and wildflowers. Sarah loved this place, Ryder said quietly, running his hand along the tree's rough bark. Used to come here when she needed to think, or when things got hard. I found her here the day our parents died, sitting under this tree like she thought it could protect her from grief. Eleanor could picture it, a young girl seeking comfort from something ancient and unchanging. Thank you for sharing it with me. I wanted you to see it. Wanted you to know. Ryder turned to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. This is where I come when I need to remember who I am, when the world gets too heavy and I need to set it down for a while. And I wanted to share that with you. Eleanor's heart clenched. Ryder? I'm in love with you, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I know it's fast. I know it's probably crazy. I know you might not feel the same way. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. Every time I look at you, every time I hear your voice or see you smile, I fall a little harder. And I needed to tell you, needed you to know before Carlson comes back and things get dangerous again. Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. Love. He loved her. This strong, steady man who'd saved her life, who'd given her safety and kindness and asked nothing in return, loved her. I don't know if I know what love is anymore, she said honestly. Everything I thought I knew got twisted and broken in that canyon, on that auction block. But Ryder, when I'm with you, I feel like maybe I could learn again, like maybe the broken parts of me could heal. That's enough, he said, stepping closer. That's more than enough. We'll figure out the rest as we go. He kissed her then, deeper than before, his hands tangling in her hair while hers gripped his shoulders. Eleanor let herself fall into it, let herself feel without analyzing, without fear holding her back. The kiss tasted like hope and promise and the possibility of joy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. I promise you something right here, right now, under this tree. Whatever comes, whatever threats we face, whatever challenges life throws at us, you'll only know joy from here on. That's my vow to you, Eleanor Pike. Joy, for as long as I'm breathing. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but for the first time in months, they were happy tears. I'm starting to believe you. They stayed in the meadow until sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and promises, building something new from the ashes of their separate tragedies. Eleanor told him about Boston, about her uncle's gentleness and love of books, about dreams she'd had before the bandits shattered everything. Ryder told her about growing up on this land, about his parents who'd built the ranch from nothing, about Sarah's laugh and Maria's fierce loyalty and the weight of being the last Hale standing. As darkness fell and they rode back toward the ranch, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there. It might always be there, a shadow left by trauma, but it no longer defined her. She was Eleanor Pike, survivor and fighter, and she was falling in love with a cowboy who'd promised her joy. They were almost back to the ranch when Mateo came riding hard to meet them, his face grim in the moonlight. We've got trouble. Jesse spotted riders about 5 miles north heading this way. At least a dozen men, maybe more. Ryder's expression went cold and hard. Carlson. Has to be. They'll be here within the hour. Eleanor's heart hammered, but she forced herself to stay calm. This was what they'd been preparing for. What do we do? Ryder looked at her, his gray eyes steady despite the danger. We protect what's ours. We stand our ground. And we make damn sure Carlson understands that threatening my people was the last mistake he'll ever make. They rode hard for the ranch, and as they crested the final hill, Eleanor could see it spread out below. Her home, her sanctuary, the place where she'd learned to be human again. Lamplight glowed in the windows, smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see figures moving inside, the other women preparing for what was coming. "Whatever happens," Ryder said, reaching over to take her hand one more time, "I meant what I said. Only joy from here on. That's my promise." Eleanor squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses and strength, the warmth and certainty. "Then let's make sure we both survive to see it through." They rode into the yard together as the first stars appeared overhead, and Eleanor Pike faced the coming threat with her head high, and her heart full of something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope for tomorrow, and the fierce determination to fight for it. The ranch house transformed into a fortress within minutes of their arrival. Ryder moved with calm efficiency, issuing quiet orders that everyone followed without question. The women were positioned at windows on the second floor, where they had the best vantage points and cover. Maria took charge of ammunition distribution, her face set in grim determination. Mateo and Jesse secured the barn and bunkhouse, creating fallback positions if the main house was breached. Eleanor found herself stationed at a window in Sarah's room alongside Mary and Rosa, a rifle in her hands and her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Below in the yard, Ryder stood with Mateo, both men armed and waiting, their faces illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the house. "I'm scared," Mary whispered, her young face pale in the darkness. "Me too," Eleanor admitted, checking her rifle for the third time. "But we're not helpless anymore, remember that. We're not victims waiting to be taken. We're fighters protecting our home." Rosa's hand found Eleanor's in the darkness and squeezed. The woman still didn't speak much, but her grip was strong, resolute. They would face this together. The sound of approaching horses carried on the night wind, growing louder with each passing second. Eleanor's breath came short and fast as she watched the darkness beyond the ranch's perimeter. Then they appeared, shadows resolving into riders, at least 15 of them, moving with the confidence of men who expected easy prey. Jack Carlson rode at their head, his scarred face twisted into something ugly in the moonlight. The riders spread out as they approached, surrounding the house and outbuildings in a loose circle. They stopped just beyond rifle range, a clear tactical position. "Ryder Hale!" Carlson's voice cut through the night. "We can do this easy or hard. Your choice. Send out the women, pay what's owed, and we'll ride out peaceful-like." Ryder stepped forward, rifle held loose but ready. "You know my answer, Carlson. You got it last time you were here. Nothing's changed except now you brought more men to die with you." Carlson's laugh was harsh. "Big words for a man outnumbered 3-1. You got what, maybe 6 guns in there? We got 15. Do the math, Hale." "I did." Ryder's voice carried absolute certainty. 15 coffins. That's the math I'm looking at. Eleanor watched tensely as the standoff continued, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard like Ryder had taught her. "Don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Stay calm. Breathe." "Last chance," Carlson called. "I'm a reasonable man, Hale. I don't want bloodshed if it can be avoided. Give us the women and whatever cash you got on hand to cover Crane's losses. We'll call it square and be gone before sunrise." "And I'm an unreasonable man when it comes to protecting what's mine," Ryder replied. "So here's my counteroffer. You and your boys turn around right now and ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of. You do that, maybe you live to see another sunrise." Carlson's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Hale. Won't be my first, probably won't be my last." Ryder raised his rifle slightly. "But threatening women who've already suffered enough? That's your mistake, and it's going to be your last one." For a long moment, nothing happened. The two groups faced each other across the yard, tension thick enough to choke on. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, feel sweat trickling down her spine despite the cool night air. Her hands were steady on the rifle, though, steadier than she'd expected. Then Carlson made a sharp gesture and everything exploded into chaos. The first shots came from Carlson's men, muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Ryder and Mateo dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets chewed into the wood and sent splinters flying. Return fire came from the house windows. Eleanor barely aware that her own finger had found the trigger, that she was shooting at shadows and movement, trying to protect the man she loved. The noise was deafening, gunfire and shouting, horses screaming in fear, the crack of wood as bullets punched through walls. Eleanor ducked as return fire shattered the window above her head, glass raining down on her hair and shoulders. Beside her, Mary was crying and shooting at the same time, her tears not stopping her from defending their home. "Reload!" Eleanor shouted, her voice barely audible over the gunfire. She fumbled with the ammunition, her training taking over even as her mind reeled. Breath in, aim, shoot. Breath, aim, shoot. The rhythm of survival. In the yard, Ryder and Mateo had taken down 3 of Carlson's men, but the odds were still terrible. The attackers had spread out, using the barn and corrals for cover, creating crossfire that made every position dangerous. Jesse appeared from the bunkhouse, his rifle spitting fire, and caught one of Carlson's men trying to flank the house. "The barn!" Maria's voice cut through the chaos from somewhere below. "They're trying to burn the barn!" Eleanor's heart seized. Fire was every rancher's nightmare, and Carlson knew it. If they lost the barn, they'd lose the horses, their mobility, their ability to escape if things went completely wrong. She swung her rifle toward the barn and saw 2 men with torches approaching the structure. She fired, missed, fired again. One of the men went down, clutching his leg. The other got his torch to the barn wall before Mateo's rifle spoke, and he crumpled. But the damage was done. Flames began to lick up the barn's wooden siding, casting flickering orange light across the battlefield. The horses inside were screaming, terrified, and Eleanor knew someone would have to get them out or they'd burn alive. Ryder knew it too. Eleanor watched in horror as he broke from cover and sprinted toward the barn. Mateo laying down, covering fire that drove Carlson's men back behind the corrals. Ryder disappeared into the burning structure, and Eleanor's world narrowed to that single point. That doorway wreathed in smoke and flame, waiting for him to emerge. Seconds felt like hours. The gunfire continued, bullets punching through walls and whistling through the air. Rosa took down another of Carlson's men with a shot that spoke of hidden skill. Margaret was methodically working her rifle from another window, her face set in grim concentration. Then Ryder appeared, leading 3 horses from the barn, their eyes rolling white with terror. He got them clear and went back in. More gunfire. Closer now. Some of Carlson's men were trying to rush the house while everyone was distracted by the fire. "Here they come!" Eleanor shouted, swinging her rifle toward the approaching figures. She fired, saw one man stumble. Mary's rifle cracked beside her, then Rosa's. The charge faltered, broke, the men scrambling back to cover. Ryder emerged again with more horses. The barn was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky, but at least the animals were safe. He ran back toward the house, bullets kicking up dirt around his feet, and Eleanor's breath didn't return until he was behind cover again. The battle had been raging for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes when Eleanor heard a new sound. More horses coming fast from the south. Her heart sank. Reinforcements for Carlson. They were already outnumbered, already struggling, and now... But the riders that appeared weren't joining Carlson's men. They swept in from the southern boundary and opened fire on the attackers, catching them in a deadly crossfire. Eleanor recognized some of them. The Donovan brothers, Bill Hendricks, Dutch, and others who'd ridden with Ryder to rescue the women from Crane's camp. "About damn time!" Mateo shouted, his voice carrying a note of relieved laughter. The arrival of reinforcements changed everything. Carlson's men, caught between the house and the new arrivals, began to break. Some tried to surrender, throwing down their weapons. Others attempted to flee, only to be cut down or captured by Ryder's allies. Carlson himself fought like a cornered animal, firing wildly as he backed toward his horse. Ryder stood from behind the water trough, rifle aimed steady at the scarred man's chest. "It's over, Carlson," Ryder called. "Drop the gun." "Go to hell." Carlson's shot went wide, panic making him sloppy. Ryder's didn't. The rifle spoke once, and Carlson went down hard, clutching his shoulder. The fight went out of him along with his blood, and he sagged against the ground, defeated. The gunfire tapered off, then stopped entirely. In the sudden silence, Eleanor could hear the crackle of flames consuming the barn, the nervous whickering of horses, her own ragged breathing. Her hands were shaking now, the rifle suddenly too heavy to hold. "Eleanor?" Ryder's voice, urgent and close. She looked down to see him standing below her window, his face streaked with soot and blood, but alive, blessedly alive. "Are you hurt?" "No," she managed. No, I'm okay. Are you? I'm fine. Stay there. We need to secure the prisoners and make sure none of Carlson's men are playing dead. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Carlson and the 4 men who'd survived were tied up and guarded by the Donovan brothers. The barn continued to burn despite everyone's efforts. It was too far gone, too hot to approach safely. They managed to save some equipment from nearby buildings, but the structure itself was a total loss. Bill Hendricks had taken a bullet to the arm, but was otherwise fine. One of Dutch's men had a graze across his ribs. Miraculously, none of Ryder's people had been seriously injured, though the house was riddled with bullet holes and 2 windows were completely shot out. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor finally came downstairs. Her legs felt like water, her hands still trembling with aftershocks of fear and adrenaline. The kitchen was full of people. The women she'd come to think of as sisters, Maria brewing enormous pots of coffee, the men who'd ridden to their rescue, Matteo and Jesse looking exhausted but triumphant, and Ryder standing by the stove with a cup of coffee in his hand, his face gray with fatigue, but his eyes finding hers the moment she entered the room. Eleanor crossed to him without a word and walked straight into his arms. He set down the coffee and held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, solid and steady and alive. "I thought I might lose you," she whispered into his shirt. "When you ran into that barn, I thought, I know." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't let the horses burn." I know you couldn't." Eleanor pulled back enough to look at his face. "But don't do that to me again. Don't make me watch you run into fire and think it might be the last time I see you." Ryder's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I promise. No more running into burning buildings, at least not without telling you first." Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the smoking ruins of the barn outside, Eleanor laughed. It surprised her, that sound, bubbling up from somewhere deep and genuine. She'd laughed so little in the past months that she'd almost forgotten how. "There it is," Ryder said softly, his eyes warm. "That's what I wanted to hear. Your joy coming back." Around them, conversation continued. Bill Hendricks was explaining how he'd sent his son riding around to the neighboring ranches the moment he'd heard about Carlson's threats, gathering men willing to stand against the traffickers. The Donovan brothers were discussing what to do with the prisoners. There was still no official law in Silverbend, but Bannock had a marshal who might actually do his job if enough upstanding citizens demanded it. "We ride them to Bannock. Make sure the marshal understands what happened here," one of the Donovans said. "Make sure he knows that human trafficking won't be tolerated in this territory, law or no law." "And if the marshal won't act?" Matteo asked. The Donovan brothers' smile was cold. "Then we make sure Carlson and his boys understand that they're not welcome in Montana territory. That if they ever come back, it'll be their last mistake." More frontier justice. Eleanor should probably feel troubled by it, but she couldn't find it in herself to care. These men had come to take her and the other women back into slavery. They'd brought violence to a place of healing. They'd tried to destroy the home that had saved her life. "Eleanor," Margaret approached, her face showing the strain of the night, but also something else. Pride. "You fought well. We all did." "We did," Eleanor agreed, looking around at the women gathered in the kitchen, Mary still pale but standing straight, Rosa, who met her eyes and nodded with fierce satisfaction, the sisters, Margaret and Jane, holding hands but smiling, and the other women whose names Eleanor had learned in the weeks since the rescue, Catherine and Anne, both showing the same exhausted relief. They'd survived. More than that, they'd fought for their survival. They weren't victims anymore. They were warriors who defended their home. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the night shadows, Ryder organized the cleanup. The prisoners were loaded onto horses under heavy guard and prepared for the long ride to Bannock. The dead were wrapped and tied across saddles. They'd be buried in town, far from the ranch that had defeated them. Bill Hendricks and his men prepared to ride out, declining Ryder's offers of rest and food. "Got our own families to get back to," Bill said, shaking Ryder's hand. "But you need us again, you send word. What you're doing here, protecting these women, standing up to men like Carlson, that's worth fighting for." "Thank you," Ryder said simply. All of you. We wouldn't have made it without your help. Yes, you would have. Bill's expression was certain. You're Ryder Hale. You always find a way. As the riders departed, taking the prisoners and the dead with them, the ranch fell quiet again. The barn still smoldered, sending up occasional plumes of smoke. The house bore the scars of battle, bullet holes, shattered windows, blood staining the porch where one of Carlson's men had fallen. But they'd won. They'd survived. And as Eleanor stood in the yard watching the sun climb higher, she felt something shift inside her, the last chains of fear breaking, falling away, leaving her lighter than she'd been in months. We need to talk, Ryder said quietly, appearing beside her. Eleanor's heart skipped. About what? About us. About what comes next. He took her hand, his fingers warm and sure around hers. About whether you're planning to stay, or if you're still thinking about heading to Oregon to find your uncle's brother. Eleanor looked at the ranch house with its bullet-scarred walls, at the smoking ruins of the barn, at the prairie stretching away in every direction. She thought about Boston, about the life she'd planned before bandits and Crane and an auction block had changed everything. She thought about Oregon and an uncle she'd never met, a mercantile in a town she'd never seen. Then she looked at Ryder, at his gray eyes and strong jaw, and the way he was trying so hard to appear casual when she could see his heart in his face. I'm staying, she said. The relief that flooded his expression made her chest tight. Yeah? Yeah. Eleanor squeezed his hand. This is home now. You're home. And I'm not running from that just because I'm scared. Are you? Scared, I mean? Terrified, Eleanor admitted. Loving someone makes you vulnerable in ways I never understood before. But you know what? I'm more terrified of walking away, of wondering what might have been, of letting fear rob me of joy. Ryder pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her like he could shield her from every bad thing the world might throw at them. I love you, Eleanor Pike. And I know we've only known each other a few weeks. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I don't care. I want you in my life. I want mornings with you and evenings with you and everything in between. Eleanor's arms went around his neck, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. I love you too. I think I started falling the moment you cut those ropes and told me I was free, and I've been falling ever since. He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise. Around them, life continued. Maria calling from the house that breakfast was ready, Jesse and Mateo discussing barn reconstruction, the other women beginning to emerge from the house to assess the damage in daylight. But for Eleanor and Ryder, the world had narrowed to just this moment, this kiss, this impossible, wonderful beginning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Eleanor's heart stopped. What? Marry me, he repeated, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I know it's soon. I know we should probably wait, but Eleanor, I don't want to wait. I want to build a life with you. I want to rebuild that barn and know you'll be here to see it finished. I want to watch the sun set over this prairie every evening with you beside me. I want forever, starting right now. Eleanor thought about all the reasons she should say no. It was too fast. They barely knew each other. She was still healing from trauma. Marriage was a huge commitment. What would people think? What about... Then she thought about Ryder running into a burning barn to save the horses, about him spending $3,000 on a stranger's freedom, about the way he looked at her like she was precious, the way he'd promised her joy, and then spent every day working to deliver on that promise. Yes, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. Ryder's smile could have lit the entire prairie. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, giddy with joy and relief, and the sheer impossible wonder of finding each other in the midst of so much darkness. Maria, Ryder called toward the house, not setting Eleanor down. We're getting married. Maria appeared in the doorway, took one look at their faces and smiled. About time. I was wondering how long you two would dance around it. You knew? Eleanor asked, surprised. Child, everyone knew except maybe you two. Maria's expression softened. You're good for him. First time I've seen real light in his eyes since Sarah died. And he's good for you. gave you back yourself when you thought you'd lost it forever." The other women crowded onto the porch, their faces bright with genuine happiness. Mary was crying again, but these were happy tears. Rosa actually smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. Margaret and Jane hugged each other, then rushed down to hug Eleanor and Ryder both. "When's the wedding?" Catherine asked, practical as always. Ryder looked at Eleanor, his gray eyes asking the question. She thought about it for all of 3 seconds before answering. "Soon," she said. "As soon as we can arrange it. I don't want to wait either." "The circuit preacher comes through in 2 weeks," Maria said. "We could have it here, under that old pine tree where Ryder took you. The one that was Sarah's favorite place." Eleanor looked at Ryder and saw emotion flicker across his face, grief and joy tangled together. Would that be okay? Would Sarah mind? "Sarah would love it," Ryder said, his voice thick. She'd say it was about time that tree saw some happiness instead of just sorrow. So it was decided. In 2 weeks, under the ancient pine in the hidden meadow, Eleanor Pike would marry Ryder Hale. The woman who'd stood on an auction block with tears in her eyes would pledge her life to the cowboy who'd promised her joy. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. The barn had to be rebuilt, the house repaired, wedding plans made. But beneath all the activity, there was a sense of peace settling over the ranch. The threat was gone. Carlson and his men were in the Bannock jail awaiting trial, and word had spread through the territory about what happened when you threatened Ryder Hale's people. Eleanor helped with everything, barn raising during the day, wedding planning in the evenings. Maria produced a wedding dress that had belonged to Ryder's mother, carefully preserved in a trunk for decades. It needed alterations, but with Eleanor's help and the other women pitching in, it was transformed into something beautiful. The other women were finding their own paths forward. Mary had decided to stay on the ranch, at least for a while, helping Maria with the house and learning to manage a household. Rosa had discovered a talent for working with horses and was spending her days in the corrals with Mateo, slowly building trust with the animals and herself. Margaret and Jane were planning to open a bakery in Silver Bend, using the skills their mother had taught them and the small inheritance they'd managed to recover. Each woman finding her own version of joy, her own path to healing. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, but it was happening. 2 weeks passed faster than Eleanor thought possible. The barn rose from the ashes stronger than before. The house was repaired, bullet holes patched, windows replaced. And on a crisp autumn morning with the sky so blue it hurt to look at, Eleanor Pike prepared to become Eleanor Hale. Maria helped her into the wedding dress, her hands gentle as she fastened the tiny buttons up the back. The other women fussed with Eleanor's hair, weaving wildflowers through the dark waves, making her feel beautiful and cherished and almost overwhelmed with emotion. "You ready for this?" Maria asked, meeting Eleanor's eyes in the mirror. Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here. The terror and pain, yes, but also the healing and hope. She thought about Ryder waiting for her under that ancient pine, about the life they would build together, about the promise of joy that had seemed impossible a few short months ago. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. They rode to the meadow in a wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers, Eleanor's hands trembling slightly as they bumped over the prairie. When the pine tree came into view, she saw that Ryder and the others had transformed the space into something magical. More flowers, simple wooden benches borrowed from neighboring ranches, and what looked like half the territory gathered to witness their union. And there, standing under the pine in a clean shirt and newly brushed hat, was Ryder. His eyes found hers across the distance, and everything else faded away. The people, the flowers, the nervous flutter in her stomach, all of it disappeared, leaving only him and the certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The circuit preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Matthews, stood beside Ryder with a worn Bible in his hands. As Eleanor walked toward them through the grass, she felt like she was walking toward her entire future. Ryder took her hands when she reached him, his grip strong and sure. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Eleanor felt her own vision blur. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Matthews began, and Eleanor barely heard the traditional words. She was too focused on Ryder, on memorizing this moment, this feeling, this overwhelming sense of rightness. When it came time for vows, Ryder spoke first, his voice clear and certain despite the emotion beneath it. "Eleanor, When I saw you on that auction block, I saw someone who refused to be broken even when everything had been taken from her. I saw strength and dignity and a spirit that couldn't be crushed. And every day since, you've proven me right. You've shown me what real courage looks like. You've taught me that love can grow even in the hardest soil, that joy can bloom even after the darkest winter. He paused, his thumbs brushing across her knuckles. I promised you joy that first day, and I renew that promise now before God and these witnesses. You'll only know joy from here on, Eleanor. That's my vow to you. For all the days of my life, I'll work to keep that promise. I'll love you, protect you, cherish you, and do everything in my power to see you smile. This I swear. Eleanor's tears fell freely now, happy tears that caught the sunlight. When it was her turn to speak, her voice shook but held strong. Ryder, you saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me freedom when I had none, safety when I knew only fear, hope when I thought I'd lost it forever. You looked at me and saw a person worth saving, worth protecting, worth loving. And you've spent every day since proving that I matter, that I'm valued, that I'm home. She smiled through her tears. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, all of it. I promise to love you with everything I have, to be your partner and your friend, to build a life with you that honors both our pasts and embraces our future. This I swear, from now until forever. Reverend Matthews smiled, clearly moved. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ryder, you may kiss your bride. And he did, sweetly and thoroughly, while their gathered friends and family cheered. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Eleanor felt complete in a way she never had before. This was joy, this moment, this man, this life they were beginning together. As they walked back through the meadow toward the wagon, hand in hand, Eleanor looked back at the pine tree standing tall against the blue sky. Sarah's tree, the place where grief had once sat heavy, now transformed into a place of new beginnings. Thank you, Eleanor whispered to the memory of a girl she'd never met, to the sister who'd inadvertently brought them together. Thank you for having a brother who learned from losing you to never take love for granted. The celebration continued back at the ranch, food and music and dancing under the stars. Eleanor waltzed with her new husband while their friends clapped and cheered, lost in his gray eyes and the impossible miracle of this moment. As midnight approached and the guests began to depart, Ryder pulled Eleanor aside, leading her away from the noise and light to the quiet edge of the prairie. The stars overhead were brilliant, countless points of light scattered across the darkness. Happy? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Eleanor leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. Happier than I ever thought possible. Happier than I have any right to be after everything that happened. You have every right, Ryder said firmly. You survived, Eleanor. You fought your way back from hell, and you deserve every moment of happiness you can find. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. We both do. We've both lost enough. It's time for something different. Joy, Ryder said, echoing his promise. Joy, Eleanor agreed, starting right now, lasting forever. He kissed her again under the star-filled sky, and Eleanor Pike Hale knew with absolute certainty that she was finally, truly home. The first morning of their marriage, Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and Ryder's arm draped across her waist. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, her mind reaching for old fears before memory returned in a warm rush. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. Ryder stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her watching him, a smile spread across his face that made her heart skip. Morning, Mrs. Hale. The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Hale. Eleanor Hale. She'd lost the name Pike gladly, shedding it like a snake sheds old skin. That girl who'd left Boston with her uncle felt like someone from another lifetime. Morning, Mr. Hale, she said, leaning in to kiss him softly. They lay there talking quietly as the sun climbed higher, making plans and promises, building their future in words and dreams. Eventually, the smell of coffee and bacon drew them from bed, and they dressed quickly before heading to the kitchen where Maria was already holding court. "Finally," the older woman said, not looking up from the stove. "I was beginning to think you two would sleep the whole day away." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, but Ryder just laughed and poured them both coffee. The other women were already gathered around the table, and Eleanor noticed that something had shifted in them overnight. They sat straighter, smiled easier, looked at her with something that went beyond gratitude to genuine affection. "We've been talking," Mary said, her young face serious, "about what comes next, for all of us." Eleanor sat down, Ryder's hand finding hers under the table. "What have you decided?" Rosa spoke up, her voice still quiet but growing stronger each day. "I want to stay here, work with the horses, help with the ranch, if you'll have me." "Of course we will," Ryder said immediately. "You're family now. All of you are." Margaret and Jane exchanged a glance before Margaret spoke. "We're still planning to open that bakery in Silver Bend, but we've been thinking we could do more than just bake. We could create a place where women who've been through what we have can find work, learn skills, start over." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. "That's a wonderful idea." "We'll need help getting started," Jane added. "Capital, supplies, a building." "Consider it done," Ryder said. "I'll speak with the banker in town. Make sure you have what you need." Catherine, who'd been quiet until now, cleared her throat. "I have a sister in Denver. I wrote to her last week, and she replied yesterday. She wants me to come stay with her, help with her children." Her eyes were bright with tears. "I haven't seen her in 5 years. I thought I'd never see her again." "When do you leave?" Eleanor asked gently. "Next week, if that's all right." "I don't want to impose, but—" "You're not imposing," Eleanor interrupted. "You're healing, and reuniting with family is exactly what you should be doing." Anne, the last of the rescued women, spoke up hesitantly. "I don't know what I want yet. I thought I did, but every time I try to plan, I just feel lost." Maria moved from the stove to place a weathered hand on Anne's shoulder. "Then you stay here until you're not lost anymore. Simple as that." Over the following weeks, the ranch settled into new rhythms. The barn was completed, better than before, with reinforced walls and a loft that could store twice as much hay. Rosa proved to have a natural gift with horses, gentling even the most skittish animals with patience and understanding. Mary became Maria's shadow, learning everything the older woman knew about running a household, her smiles coming more easily with each passing day. Margaret and Jane rode into Silver Bend 3 times a week, working with Ryder to secure a small building on Main Street and outfit it as a bakery. Eleanor went with them once and was surprised to find the town's attitude had shifted. Where before she'd seen hunger and cruelty in men's eyes, now she saw respect. Word had spread about the battle at the H-Bar-R, about Ryder Hale, and his people standing against traffickers. The ranch had become something of a legend, and Eleanor found herself treated with a deference that felt strange but not unwelcome. "They're afraid of you," the general store owner told her as she purchased flour and sugar for the household. "Afraid of what you represent. Women who fight back, who refuse to be victims. It's changing things in this town." Eleanor thought about that as she loaded her purchases into the wagon. Was it fear, or was it the beginning of something better? Respect, maybe even equality. She didn't know, but she hoped it was the latter. Catherine left on a bright autumn morning, tearful goodbyes exchanged all around. Eleanor hugged her tight, whispering encouragements and promises to write. As the stage pulled away, carrying Catherine toward Denver and her sister, Eleanor felt Ryder's arms settle around her shoulders. "You gave her that," he said quietly, "the chance to go home." "We gave her that," Eleanor corrected, "all of us together." The days grew shorter as autumn deepened into winter. Eleanor discovered she loved ranch life, the rhythm of seasons, the satisfaction of hard work, the simple joy of watching the prairie change colors with each passing day. She learned to manage the household accounts, to preserve food for winter, to judge cattle and weather with equal skill. Ryder taught her to rope and brand, to track and hunt, to read the land like a book written in grass and sky. Their marriage deepened too, moving beyond the initial rush of passion into something steadier and more profound. They learned each other's habits and quirks, their fights and reconciliations, the particular language of their love. Eleanor discovered that Ryder sang off-key when he thought no one was listening, that he had a sweet tooth for Maria's apple pie, that he sometimes woke from nightmares about Sarah and needed to be held without words. Ryder learned that Eleanor was fiercely competitive at cards, that she read poetry when she couldn't sleep, that certain sounds, the jingle of chains, the creak of rope, could still send her into panic attacks that required patience and understanding to weather. But they weathered them together, and with each storm passed, their bond grew stronger. Winter came hard that year, blanketing the prairie in snow and driving the cattle to the lower pastures. The ranch became a cocoon of warmth and light against the cold darkness outside. Long evenings were spent around the fireplace, the women sewing or reading while Mateo played guitar and Jesse told stories that made everyone laugh. On Christmas Eve, they gathered for a feast Maria had been preparing for days. The table groaned under the weight of roasted turkey and potatoes, vegetables preserved from the summer garden, pies and cakes, and enough food to feed twice their number. They held hands around the table while Ryder said grace, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked God for bringing them all together, for giving them this family forged not by blood, but by choice and circumstance. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass. To joy, Eleanor added, her eyes meeting his across the table. To home, Rosa said softly, and everyone echoed it. To home. That night, as Eleanor and Ryder lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside, she told him the news she'd been keeping secret for 2 weeks. Her hand found his in the darkness and guided it to her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she whispered. Ryder went completely still. Then his arms were around her, pulling her close, his face buried in her hair as his shoulders shook with emotion. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet with tears. "You're sure?" His voice was barely audible. "The doctor in Bannack confirmed it last week. I wanted to be certain before I told you." "A baby!" Ryder's hand splayed across her stomach, reverent and wondering. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, suddenly anxious. They'd never discussed children, never planned this. "Happy?" Ryder's laugh was choked with tears. "Eleanor, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. A baby, our child, someone who'll carry both of us forward into the future." They talked late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. They'd need to add on to the house, create a nursery. They'd need supplies, a doctor closer than Bannack, help when the baby came. But beneath the practical considerations ran a current of pure joy. From the ashes of tragedy and trauma, new life was emerging. It felt like a promise, like the universe saying that darkness didn't get the final word. Eleanor told the others the next morning, Christmas Day, and the house erupted in celebration. Maria cried and immediately started planning, pulling out baby clothes she'd saved from when her own children were small. Mary squealed with delight and begged to help with the baby when it arrived. Rosa smiled her quiet smile and began whittling a small wooden horse with surprising skill. "You're going to be wonderful parents," Margaret said, hugging them both. "This baby is so lucky." The weeks that followed were full of preparation and anticipation. Ryder threw himself into building the nursery, working long hours to craft a cradle from pine wood he'd been saving for something special. Eleanor helped Maria sort through baby clothes and blankets, her heart swelling every time she thought about holding her own child in her arms. But there was also fear. She couldn't help remembering her own mother's death in childbirth, the way Uncle Theodore had gone silent and sad every time the subject came up. What if something went wrong? What if she wasn't strong enough, wasn't ready, wasn't— "Stop," Ryder said one evening, catching her spiraling into anxiety. "I can see it in your face, all the what-ifs trying to steal your joy. Don't let them. We've faced worse than childbirth, you and I. We've survived things that should have broken us. We'll survive this too." "But what if—" "No what-ifs." His hands framed her face, his gray eyes steady and sure. "We're going to bring this baby into the world safe and healthy. You're going to be an amazing mother. And whatever challenges come, we'll face them together. That's what we do." Eleanor leaned into his certainty, borrowing his strength when her own faltered. It was what they'd been doing since the beginning, supporting each other, filling in each other's gaps, being stronger together than they ever could have been apart. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing green back to the prairie. Margaret and Jane's bakery opened to surprising success, their goods quickly becoming known throughout the territory. They hired 2 women who'd found themselves in difficult circumstances, giving them work and dignity and a fresh start. Anne finally decided what she wanted: to become a teacher. Ryder helped arrange for her to attend a teaching college in Helena, paying her tuition and expenses with the same quiet generosity he'd shown Eleanor on that auction block so many months ago. "You don't have to do this," Anne protested. "You've already done so much." "It's not about having to," Ryder said. "It's about wanting to. You've got a gift for explaining things, for helping people understand. Kids need teachers like you. Go learn how to do it right, then come back and open a school here. God knows Silver Bend needs one." Rosa, who'd become indispensable with the horses, approached Ryder and Eleanor one evening with a proposal. She wanted to start a breeding program, to raise and train horses that could be sold across the territory. She'd been saving every penny of her wages and had sketched out detailed plans that showed unexpected business acumen. "You don't need my permission," Ryder told her. "You're not a dependent here, Rosa. You're a partner. If you want to start a horse breeding operation, we'll support you however we can." "I want to do it under the H-Bar-R brand," Rosa said quietly. "This place saved my life. I want to honor that." So the ranch continued to evolve, growing beyond just cattle into something more diverse and resilient. The horse breeding program started small but showed immediate promise. Margaret and Jane's bakery expanded, adding 3 more employees. Anne left for Helena with promises to return as a certified teacher. And through it all, Eleanor's pregnancy progressed. Her body changed, swelling with new life, and she marveled at the miracle of it. She felt the baby kick for the first time while sitting on the porch watching a sunset, Ryder's hand on her belly to share the moment. "Strong," he said, wonder in his voice. "Just like the mother." "Or stubborn like the father," Eleanor teased. They argued good-naturedly about names, unable to agree on anything until one evening Ryder suggested Sarah if it was a girl. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? That's a lot of weight to put on a child." "Not weight," Ryder corrected. "Legacy. Sarah was all light and joy and fierce love. If our daughter carries even a fraction of that, she'll be extraordinary. And if it's a boy—" Ryder thought for a moment. "Theodore, after your uncle. The man who tried to give you a better life, who loved you enough to brave the frontier." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Theodore or Sarah. Either way, their child would carry forward the memory of people who'd mattered, who'd been loved and lost, but never forgotten. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and wildflowers. Eleanor grew ungainly, her movement slowed by the weight she carried, but she'd never felt more alive. She continued working as long as she could, helping Maria in the garden, managing household accounts, supervising the small army of people who now called the H-Bar-R home. Because it had grown far beyond what it had been when Eleanor first arrived. The ranch now employed a dozen hands, housed half that many women in various stages of healing and rebuilding, and had become known throughout Montana Territory as a place where second chances were given freely, and dignity was never questioned. In late August, on a night when heat lightning flickered on the horizon and the air hung heavy with the promise of rain, Eleanor's labor began. Maria had been preparing for weeks, assembling supplies and enlisting the help of a midwife from Bannock, who'd agreed to stay at the ranch for the final month of Eleanor's pregnancy. The labor was long and hard, testing every ounce of Eleanor's strength. There were moments when the pain overwhelmed her, when she thought she couldn't continue, when old fears rose up and threatened to drown her. But Ryder was there, holding her hand, whispering encouragements, reminding her that she was the strongest person he knew. "You faced down Carlson with a rifle in your hands," he said during one particularly brutal contraction. "You survived things that would have broken most people. You can do this, Eleanor. You can do anything." And she did. As dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor pushed one final time and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "A girl," the midwife announced, placing the squirming, wailing bundle on Eleanor's chest. "A healthy, perfect baby girl." Eleanor looked down at her daughter through tears of exhaustion and joy. The baby had Ryder's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair, and she was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever seen. All the pain, all the fear, all the struggles of the past year collapsed into this single moment of pure, uncomplicated love. Ryder's arms came around them both, his face wet with tears as he looked at his daughter. "Hello, Sarah," he whispered. "Welcome home." Baby Sarah thrived from the start, a loud and demanding presence who wrapped everyone around her tiny fingers. Mary was her devoted nursemaid. Rosa carved her tiny wooden animals to hang over her cradle, and Maria spoiled her shamelessly. Matteo and Jesse competed to make her laugh, Jesse swearing he'd teach her to rope before she could walk. Eleanor settled into motherhood with the same determination she'd brought to everything else. The sleepless nights were hard, the constant demands exhausting, but every time she looked at Sarah's face, she felt only gratitude. This child represented everything good that had come from darkness, every promise of joy fulfilled. One evening when Sarah was 3 months old, Eleanor carried her out to the porch, where Ryder sat watching the sunset. She settled beside him, their daughter cradled between them, and for a long moment they just existed together in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that day?" Eleanor asked finally. "The auction?" "Every day," Ryder admitted. "I think about how close I came to not being there, to letting you be sold to Bull Garrison or Marcus Hendry. I think about all the ways it could have gone wrong. But it didn't." Eleanor shifted Sarah in her arms, the baby making soft sounds in her sleep. It went exactly right. Against all odds, in the middle of so much darkness, it went right. Ryder's arms settled around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You know what I think about most? That moment when you put your hand in mine. When you chose to trust me even though you had no reason to. That changed everything, Eleanor. That changed my whole life." Eleanor thought about trust, about the long journey from terror to safety, from brokenness to healing. She thought about all the women who'd passed through the ranch, each finding her own path forward. Catherine reunited with her sister in Denver, Anne studying to be a teacher, Margaret and Jane running a successful business, Rosa breeding horses that were becoming famous across the territory, Mary blooming into a confident young woman who'd recently started courting Jesse with Ryder's reluctant blessing, and herself, Eleanor Hale, wife and mother, rancher and survivor, someone who'd faced the worst humanity had to offer and chosen joy anyway. "We should ride to the meadow," she said suddenly, "to Sarah's tree. I want to show our daughter where her father promised me joy." They went the next Sunday, the whole household making it a celebration. They rode in wagons and on horseback to the hidden meadow, spreading blankets under the ancient pine and sharing a feast Maria had prepared. Baby Sarah was passed from person to person, each one loving her in turn, and Eleanor watched with a full heart as her found family celebrated life and love and second chances. As the sun began to set, Ryder stood and held up his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying across the meadow. "To all of you. Every person here has faced darkness and chosen light. You've taken pain and transformed it into purpose. You've turned tragedy into triumph, and you've created something here that's bigger than any of us individually. You've created home." "To home," everyone echoed, glasses raised. "But mostly," Ryder continued, his eyes finding Eleanor's, "I want to toast my wife. Eleanor, you came into my life as a stranger on an auction block, and you became everything, my partner, my love, the mother of my child, the reason I wake up grateful every morning. You've shown me that broken things can heal, that joy can bloom even after the darkest winter, that love is always worth the risk." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "I promised you joy that first day, and watching you now, holding our daughter under this tree, I think I finally kept that promise." Eleanor stood, baby Sarah in her arms, and crossed to her husband. "You kept it 1,000 times over," she said softly. "Every day, every moment, every small kindness and grand gesture. You gave me back myself when I thought I'd lost her forever. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me love when I thought I'd never trust anyone again." She looked around at the gathered faces, Maria and Matteo, Jesse and Mary, Rosa and the others. "All of you did, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to pay that forward." As the stars began to appear overhead, Eleanor and Ryder sat together under the pine tree, their daughter sleeping between them. They talked about the future, about expanding the ranch, about the school Anne would open when she returned, about Sarah's first steps and first words and first everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked. "Spending $3,000 on a stranger, putting yourself in danger, changing your whole life?" Ryder was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he smiled. "Not for a single second. That $3,000 bought me everything that matters. It bought me you and this life and joy I never thought I'd feel again after Sarah died. It was the best investment I ever made." Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the stars multiply across the darkening sky. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from Boston to the auction block to this meadow, from terror to trust to love. It had been hard and painful and full of moments when she'd wanted to give up, but she hadn't. She'd kept going, one day at a time, one step at a time, until the impossible became real. "Tell me again," she said softly, the words almost a ritual now. Ryder knew what she was asking. He always knew. "You'll only know joy from here on," he said, his voice warm and certain. "That was my promise, and I meant every word. Joy for you, joy for me, joy for Sarah, and any other children we might have. Joy for everyone who comes through those ranch gates looking for a second chance. Joy, Eleanor, from now until forever." And as she sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by love and family and the sweet weight of her sleeping daughter, Eleanor Pike Hale knew with absolute certainty that he'd kept that promise. The auction block was a lifetime away now. Its horrors faded to distant memory. In its place was this, a life built on trust and courage, a home created from wreckage and hope, a future stretching bright and golden before them. Years would pass, bringing their own challenges and triumphs. Sarah would grow tall and strong, eventually joined by two brothers who'd keep Ryder busy, teaching them to rope and ride. The ranch would prosper, its reputation as a sanctuary for those in need spreading far beyond Montana territory. Margaret and Jane's bakery would become an institution, employing dozens of women and expanding into 3 locations. Anne would return to open her school, educating a generation of frontier children. Rosa's horse breeding program would become legendary, her animals sought after from California to the Dakotas. But that Sunday evening under the pine tree, with the stars emerging overhead and her husband's arm around her shoulders, Eleanor didn't think about any of that. She just sat in the moment, holding her daughter, surrounded by love, and let herself feel the simple, profound joy of being alive. A cowboy's vow had rebuilt her world, taking a woman with tears in her eyes and showing her that happiness was still possible, that love still existed, that the human spirit could heal from even the deepest wounds. And as the prairie wind whispered through the branches overhead and baby Sarah stirred in her sleep, Eleanor closed her eyes and whispered her own vow to the universe, to whatever force had brought her through darkness into light. She would spend the rest of her life honoring this second chance. She would help others find their own paths from despair to hope. She would raise her children to be kind and brave and strong. She would love her husband with everything she had. And she would never, ever forget what it felt like to stand on that auction block believing her life was over, only to discover it was just beginning. From tears to joy. From slavery to freedom. From brokenness to wholeness. That was her story. That was their story. And it was just getting started. The end.